Yo, what's good? Big Z here, and today I'm going to show you 5 ways to make your bass line sound more professional. So what I just showed you is the finished bass line using all the tips I'm about to tell you. But let's go back to the beginning when I just started with this basic bass line idea. So those are just the basic notes I put down for the bass line, but obviously it does not sound good at all. Which brings me to tip number 1, which is you should really pay attention to the length of each note in your bass line. Changing the length of the notes can really change the whole feel of a track. For example, let's say I made all of the notes longer. So that gives it a more fluid vibe with the long notes. But let's say I wanted to make all notes really short. That makes a totally different bouncy vibe. But ideally, you want to use a combination between long and short notes to create whatever vibe you're going for. And you can play around with this for a long time until you find whatever pattern sounds best to you. Right now, I'm going to mess around with this pattern to make these note lengths sound a lot better. Something I would definitely recommend is to leave little gaps between the longer notes to make sure there's a clear start and end to the note. Like for example, this first note where I've made it longer, if I just had it going straight into the second note, you can't tell where that first note ends and the second one starts. So it's better to leave a little space in between. Now, since this is a repetitive bass line, I'm just going to copy over this sequence down to the other 2 bars. So now we have the basic pattern down. So it's still sounding pretty boring, but now we can move on to tip number 2, which is to use pitch bend automation to make your bass lines a lot more interesting. So let's go into Serum here, where this bass sound is coming from, and we just want to make sure that the pitch bend range is set to 12 semitones going both ways. This will give us a lot more room to mess around with the pitch bending than where it is on the default position, which is just 2 semitones. So I always like to put it at 12 semitones. And then depending on what DAW you have, in Logic you can do it right in the MIDI file right here. You can go into the automation settings and go to pitch bend right here. And you might have to do a little bit of math for this. For example, this pitch bend range goes from -64 to 63 up here. So it's just weird random values for the pitch. So I'm going to take that value of 63 and divide it by 12, which is my pitch bend range in semitones, and you'll get somewhere around 5. And all that means is whenever I move a notch up by 5 units on this scale, it's going up roughly 1 semitone. So now that we know that, we can get working on some pitch bends. You definitely don't want to overdo it when it comes to pitch bends, so I'm just going to work on these last 2 notes of each bar right here. So I think it would sound cool if we kind of glided this note into the last note, and then glided this last note into that first note of the bar again. So the jump from here to here is obviously 1 semitone, so I can just zoom in here and drag this pitch bend up 1 semitone. And now the jump from this note down back to here is 3 semitones, so I'm going to do the same thing down there. And you can mess around with this as much as you want. Like if I wanted a big pitch bend to start the sequence, I think that's a little overkill here, so I'm just going to keep the same pitch automation I have already. And since it's a repeating sequence, I'm just going to copy that over here and then copy it over again right here. And then I'm going to have to change it on this last bar because the notes are different. Actually, that one's still going up 1 semitone, but then this next interval is also going up 1 semitone. So now that should sound okay. So adding that pitch bend automation just gives the track so much more movement and keeps the bass line a lot more interesting. Now we can move on to tip 3, which is to add an extra layer, but to only use it to emphasize certain bass notes. So you're not adding a layer playing the exact same pattern, you're adding a layer just to emphasize certain notes. And it'll keep things more interesting this way and add some contrast to the bass line. So this works well with the punchy, percussive sounding bass. So all I'm gonna do is drag down the MIDI that's already on the other bass line, and then I'm gonna mute all the notes I don't need. So I think I wanna emphasize these two 16th notes right here. So let's just mute everything else that is not those two notes. We also need to make sure this bass layer isn't interfering with the main bass. So I'm just gonna low cut it around like 100 Hertz probably. And to make it a little more interesting, you can even add some extra notes here. And if I play that in the full mix, it should make it sound a lot more interesting. So the bass line is sounding a lot better now, but it still sounds a little bit too clean for me. So tip 4 is going to be to add some extra noise to your bass. And there are a few different ways to do this, but the easiest way is to definitely use the RC20 plugin. So I'm going to go into RC20 right here, and all I need to do is turn on this noise oscillator right here. I'm going to turn the follow and duck knobs up all the way and just cycle through some different noises to add on top of the bass. I like this muff noise right here because it's a little darker than that bright white noise, but I'm just gonna dial it back so it's really subtle in the mix. So that's something that's more felt than heard in the mix, but I think these small subtle changes make a big difference. Now the final tip is gonna be to add automation to your bass line to keep things moving and keep things interesting. The most obvious one you can do here is to open up the cutoff of the filter at certain points. So in this sound, I know that I have macro 2 in Serum tied to the filter cutoff in the effects section of this bass sound. So now I can just go into my automation settings and mess around with macro 2 to play with the cutoff of that filter. So I just wanted a really subtle effect at the end of that 4-bar pattern there. But you can really automate anything you want, from the shape of the envelope to just some random effects on there. But with all this automation you can do, I find it's best just to keep everything pretty subtle so you can feel it in the mix, but it's not too noticeable or annoying or taking away from the main groove of the track. At the end of the day, all these subtle little changes you can make will add up to make your bass line sound a lot more professional. Just to recap, here are all 5 of the tips listed together if you want an easier way to remember them. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this video, have fun making music out there, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.